On today's show, what were the Cavs point guards last season? We're going to break down Darius Garland and that whole crew on this episode for Tuesday, May 9th, 2023.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. I'm Chris Manning. I cover the Cavs and the NBA for outlets like SB Nation, Cleveland Magazine, The Just Basketball Show, and more. My co-host is Evan Dammarrell, the founder of independent site Down Euclid, which covers the entire Cleveland sports scene. Both of us credentialed members of the Cavs media core. And as always, we have Jake Stevens producing Check Out the Merrier wherever you get your tunes. I want to thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. Remember, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. All right, segment one today. We're going to dive into what the Cavs point guard position was this year. Segment two, we're going to hit on Darius Garland's first year with Donovan Mitchell and what that backcourt looked like. And segment three, where does Darius Garland go from here? We're going to have a part two of this kind of point guard discussion coming on Friday. We have some all defense and all NBA stuff we'll break down on the Wednesday and Thursday shows before we get back to the point guard chatter. But Evan, let's start with the point guards this past year. When I ask you what was the Cavs point guard position last year, what's your answer?
A little bit messy. I think just in the broad scope of things, you obviously have Darius Garland. The addition of Donovan Mitchell is interesting, and we'll dive more into that in a minute. But just looking through the lens of what the point guard position was for the Cavs, it started and ended with Darius Garland because Hollow Neto was a bridge to get you to Ricky Rubio coming back to the four. And Ricky Rubio, despite being healthy enough to play, clearly wasn't the same player he was last year. Maybe just isn't 100% mentally or physically. But a lot of it starts with Garland, and I think just looking through the lens of point guard play, he was much better compared to last year, and that was an all-star caliber campaign for Garland, but he has to share the floor with a truly dominant force and arguably one of the best shooting guards in the league in Donovan Mitchell, and he puts up fairly comparable stats on much better efficiency just compared to last season, and that's without sharing the floor with Mitchell and Garland mostly shouldering the entirety of the offensive responsibilities, whether it's scoring or playmaking or anything in between for Cleveland last year, and it's still a work in progress, I think, just especially with that Mitchell dynamic and wrinkle, which, again, we'll dive into in a little bit. But it started and began with Darius Garland, who I thought was sensational this year. And maybe folks who just look at counting stats will say, like, oh, he plateaued compared to last season. But I think he was better than last year, and he has a lot of room for improvement. Sure, I think every player on the Cavs does at this juncture, just based on how the postseason went. But he had a lot of big moments for Cleveland, clearly, like a career high 50 plus points, if I remember correctly. But either way, this was a really good year for Garland, and it's fascinating to see how quickly Cleveland kind of course corrected after trading Kyrie 5-ish years ago and finding their next point guard of the future, who's way less of a headache off the floor.
This position is about Darius Garland to me. This is his position. This is the one. If you felt very, very reliant, I think, on him to give you kind of the point guard minute you're looking for, right? Like Rubio didn't give you very much at all. That was a problem, I think. I think if you look at kind of what all of these guys were, Neto just gave you a little bit something, but obviously was not playable in the playoffs. Mitchell, as much as you could say, okay, could we slide him into playing some backup point guard at times and facilitate? Like, that's not really what he's great at and what makes him special. It's not a perfect role for him unless you get the right guards to kind of to play with him a little bit. This makes me go forward is kind of, you're wondering, I think, how do you go best about supporting Darius Garland as he gets older, as he gets bigger, as we understand what he is. Like, what are the ways that where like you can take some of the stuff off his play? You're obviously going to need him to be his all-star self. You're going to need him to be the best version of Darius Garland that we've seen. But I think you're also trying to be in a position where, okay, you have adequate support, you have adequate depth. And I think there's something to be said of just like, you know what, like you got to just find ways to kind of have, like Rubio makes sense as an idea, but I think you need that to actually be a thing if you're going to bank on it or try to plan for it.
I agree. I think people were certainly misguided in thinking Ricky Rubio is going to be able to recapture that lightning in the bottle from the beginning of last season. I just think that was an otherworldly performance from Rubio. That's just truly like the apex of what he probably could have been prior to the ACL tear. But you and I had noted before he bled his knee against the Pelicans, I guess we could say 2 seasons ago now, he was coming back down to earth statistically a little bit, but still fundamentally worked in 2 guard sets with Garland. He was playing bigger. He was at least playing hard on defense, and he was giving you that playmaking and a little bit of that edge and just the table setting that the Cavs needed off the bench. And you didn't really get that from Rubio this year, and I think that certainly exposed the Cavs quite a bit in the playoffs, especially maybe if Garland just didn't have it going or if New York amplified the pressure enough, because your other alternative is Donovan Mitchell, because as you said, Raul Neto wasn't playable in the postseason, and Ricky Rubio made it very clear in game 1 he wasn't, but JV Bickerstaff still kept trying to go to him, see if he could get something, but there just wasn't anything there for Rubio just at this time. And again, we'll see how maybe he looks heading into next year, and we maybe could have a different conversation closer to the trade deadline or whatever, but with the luxury of Donovan Mitchell, I don't think addressing the backup point guard position is as pressing, but you definitely want to find some type of younger legs or maybe somebody who's just a little bit more reliable. So 1, you're not burning out Garland as much, or 2, if you have a guy who can just kind of control the tempo and the cadence, especially with your reserves, and maybe slots in nicer with Karis LeVert comparatively to Rubio, like that's a bridge you have to cross at that time, but we'll see. But Garland was sensational this year. I know I keep saying that, but like he was great. Like I cannot be disappointed if I were the Cavs at evaluating Darius Garland's performance, especially after committing so much money to him this summer.
Look, this is an elite point guard here. This is it's sort of by expected wins at dunks and threes. Here's the rankings of point guards as far as expected wins goes. Luka's 1, Damian Lillard is 2, Kyrie is 3, which is wild. Steph Curry is 4, Darius is 5. He's ahead of Harden. He's ahead of Drew Holiday. He's ahead of Van Vliet, Trae Young, Halliburton, De'Aaron Fox, John Morant, Jalen Brunson, Mike Conley. He's ahead of all these guys. This is at a flat up elite point, and I think you're right in saying that, you know what, do they necessarily need like a super pristine high-end point guard at the backup? No, like I think Rubio at $6 million is like the right slot. I disagree. I definitely disagree about the Mitchell component of it. That is where I think we have a breakdown here, and is that I don't think that is what Mitchell cannot do what Devin Booker does, which is absorb your playmaking ability. What happens sometimes when Mitchell gets the ball is things get kind of stagnant. And like Rubio makes sense to him as a compliment because he will keep things moving. I think getting Evan Mobley with him as a way to keep things moving makes like some sense to lean on other creators. When it's Garland, there's a reason I think Garland is the one you trust late in games with the ball a lot of times, because that guy feels like he never makes the wrong decision. I think he was, maybe the counting stats weren't as big, but had just as impactful of a year to me in a lot of ways this year. I agree with you on that. This position to me is just all about Garland, and I think what you're going to get out of this position going forward is just how high can Garland get? Like, does he, is he the 5th best point guard in the league right now? I think he's probably he's definitely in the top 10. It's a super, super competitive position, but you have a guy who's going to be in contention for All-Star games as long as he's healthy for the next 5 years. And that at the very least is a great place to be for Cleveland.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially just with the guys you had mentioned aging out, and just especially in the Eastern Conference, when you look at just the scope of where the top point guards are currently ranked age-wise. I mean, sure, that there could be something that shakes up the status quo, like a Damian Lillard trade, but I doubt that happens with Portland. But let's just assume that doesn't happen. Like, right now, it's Darius Garland, maybe Jalen Brunson. It depends on how you feel, if Marcus Smart's a point guard or not, or if James Harden is a point guard as well, or more of a 2-guard playing that point guard role for Philly. But Darius Garland in the short term is prepped to just kind of keep climbing the ladder and becoming the best point guard in the East. Maybe not next season, but certainly the season after, when he's starting to enter his prime.
Yeah, star player at the very least. And that, if there's anything you can say about what this is and what this position is, you have him that's better than most teams in the league. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, and comedy and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can start getting hyped for all the fun you're going to have. They have flash deals on last-minute tickets, easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. You get images of seat views. You get everything at Gametime. Forget planning months in advance. Gametime has deals on tickets right up until the day of the event. I know when I go to New York this summer, that's going to be something I take advantage of. You can bet that when I go, I'm going to be looking at the best deals I can get for Liberty Aces in Brooklyn. The Gametime guarantee also means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less somewhere else, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. We're going to be back tomorrow. We're going to dive into, Evan, what award is being announced Tuesday again? Remind me.
All defensive team honors. So hopefully, I would assume at least Evan Mobley's going to make one of the teams, but maybe it's first. And that'll be a pretty interesting conversation, just depending on how the votes and everything break out.
Yeah, so we'll dive in talking about defense and all of that great stuff on tomorrow's Locked On Cavs. All right, so Garland's first year with Mitchell. Evan, here I'm going to read you what the playoff stat differences were, and we'll go from there. In the regular season, Cavs were plus 8.9 points per 100 possessions on the floor together in the regular season. That's outstanding. Had an offensive rating of 119.7 when those two were on the floor together. That is very, very good. You flip it into the postseason. As a duo, they were minus 3.8 per 100 in the playoffs with an offensive rating of 108.5 in a 11.2 difference per 100 possessions. Obviously a 5-game sample, but the playoffs are the playoffs. We have to view it obviously in that certain way. So I ask you this. How much do you put into what we saw in the playoffs and what's going on there and what you feel like you can learn from what went wrong with this duo just based on round one? What does that tell you as we kind of look forward for what's going to come next for them?
So it's tricky just because we don't really have a super deep body of work to kind of perform this autopsy for the Cavs, just in terms of the backcourt play between Garland and Mitchell. Mitchell didn't have it other than game one and maybe the playmaking aspect in game two. Garland was shaky in game 3 and 1, but brought it in 2 and 4. Kind of tried to bring it in 5. It wasn't enough. But 4 especially was like the biggest standout performance, just considering the pressure, the circumstances, playing in the Garden, et cetera, et cetera. And like Garland looked nervous. He looked timid. For me, it's maybe the maturation off the court where you see him maintaining his composure, maybe not losing his cool comparatively like when they lost to the Pistons last season and they kind of watched their playoff hopes become a play-in blunder. But I'm curious to see what work Garland personally puts in. Like, I think he needs to get a little bit bigger. Like, you look at a guy like Jalen Brunson, who's a similar size height-wise, and I know they don't have the same frame, but like Brunson is just thick and just like built more sturdy. And if Garland is able to maybe to handle the physicality of opponents, but also have the strength and the not the athleticism, at least the strength to rely on you getting through contact and maybe drawing enough contact to get to the free throw line, somewhat similar to like your take with Colin Sexton many moons ago, but not as similar because you don't want to get that jacked up or be pushing plates all around wherever Garland decides to spend his offseason.
I mean, I would like to see a video of Darius Garland in like Nashville, like pushing around a sled of weight. I love, give me any kind of like weird content like that.
Darius Garland pushing plates up Broadway at 1 a.m. on a Saturday night when bachelorette parties are hitting their absolute heyday, and he's just like, everyone's crying or drunk and upset, and you just see a dude hustling up the street pushing a bunch of plates. Back to this though, there's small improvements Garland can make. I think the turnovers weren't as bad of an issue, but there were games where he certainly killed the Cavs' chances, whether it was the postseason or the regular season, in terms of just sloppy and careless ball handling, or maybe just a lack of mental focus in terms of playmaking, but Garland is kind of unapologetic in that regard, though, where he said, listen, I'm okay with those turnovers if it means we're playing aggressive basketball, or if it means we're trying to get into our offensive sets or play faster, try to get everybody else involved. So it's a bit of a balancing act, but if he wants to level up as a player, I think obviously just getting bigger and learning to handle maybe that physicality, maybe even the taste of it helps a lot. But being more cautious with the basketball and not shooting yourself in the foot and limiting your opportunities is the next big thing. But again, if he is being aggressive and that's resulting in not just a high volume of assists, but the ability for the Cavs to get a lot of offensive flow going, like, you want that. And I think you're willing to stomach some of those sloppy turnovers at times if that's what the result is at the end.
I think those two guys have another level to get to together. I think there is some very natural connection between those two. I think there are things you could do set wise. I think there are things they could do together just to kind of facilitate off each other a little bit. Like sometimes, like, you know, I'm probably missing things that don't come to mind. I think there is still a little bit of your turn, my turn with them too, a little bit. It's not all the time. It is not like the inherent way that they play, but there is a little bit of, like, I think you could do stuff with them together. I think guard screening. I think one of them coming off of screens a little more aggressively. One of the things I liked in the playoffs was that they used Garland in the corner as like as a place for Mitchell to go with the ball at times. And I think just building stuff in like that is a way to kind of bring some more in together. I think like those two have. Like if this version of this team is going to hit whatever ceiling it's going to be, and you're going to keep Mitchell around long term and all of that, Evan Mobley has a lot to say about what that's going to be, right? But you're not going to get anywhere unless these two guys are the foundation of your offense. You even saw in the regular season, I think, really what the offensive ceiling for them could be, and I think where it could get better. I think where I look at this, Evan, is I say, okay, there's like three ways you could look at this, and who's asking the question. There's number one, the lens of, okay, what does the team think went wrong? And how does the guards fit into that? What schematically do they look at and say, okay, what can we do differently? What can they do better? Then you have Garland and Mitchell together and saying, okay, how did we not work together well? What can we do better to get more in sync? What other duos can we watch to see how we can kind of get a gel a little bit together, steal some stuff from other teams? Thirdly, what do they both look at this and say, what can I get, but what am I going to get better at? Is it Mitchell? Is it playmaking stuff? Is it patience? With Garland, like, is it adding a little bit of bulk to drive more and get fouls and stuff? Like, what are these answers? All of those things are going to combine, I think, to dictate where these two go as a duo. I think I would be very optimistic about it. Their fit was clean from the beginning in a lot of ways, but there's just clearly, based on the playoffs, there's room to grow. The turnover stuff is what it is. You have high usage, you're going to rack up turnovers. I think it's about how do you answer the questions about what went wrong in the playoffs versus the regular season. Where does that take you? And what are the results next year if and when you get there again?
I think that's a fair analysis too. To your point, the fit between Garland and Mitchell was it was pretty seamless. I think there were some minor growing pains, of course, but it did devolve a lot, especially in the postseason, to your turn, my turn, or maybe just one of those guys waiting to see if the other one can get the offense going. And that might be just like my most consistent frustration with Garland, is just like sometimes he can be a little too unselfish in terms of just getting his teammates involved, where I know he has the ability to be a big time player, making big time shots, or maybe just building that momentum for Cleveland. And it's probably part of that growing and figuring out process. But if you're the Cavs, postseason results notwithstanding, like, you have a pretty strong body of work of what worked in the regular season. And now you have to just figure out, okay, what worked for us for the first 82 that is applicable to not just the 5 games we appeared in the playoffs, but for as long as we can go next season and beyond. Because obviously time is ticking, because you have to figure out this Donovan Mitchell situation, just what the Cavs can be. But you also need to figure out this fit and just kind of figure out how, sure, they have a good thing going, but how can they truly gel and mesh so that they are a cleaner fit with one another? And maybe they break down film of what worked with like Mike Conley and Donovan Mitchell together, or what worked when Ricky Rubio was a lot younger and Donovan Mitchell together. Heck, even Hollow Neto with Donovan Mitchell on the floor when they're all together with the Jazz. And maybe study film from that. Now, sure, Garland isn't the same player. Maybe he's somewhat built similarly, more so to Mike Conley in terms of just play style at times, but it's going to be interesting to see how the Cavs probe this and just figure out what these next steps are to maximize the potential of what this offense can be. Because I agree. A lot of it does hinge on Evan Mobley's development as well, but your alpha and omega on offense are going to be Garland and Mitchell. Like, the ball is going to be in their hands more often than not in late game situations, and you want those two feeling completely comfortable within the flow of the offense no matter what.
Look, Garland, I think, is the best point guard, at least in terms of where he's at in his career, that Mitchell's ever played with. There was going to be an adjustment there, and that's another part of this. Like Mike Conley that he had in Utah was a different player than he was at his peak in Memphis. Ricky Rubio is not at the level of what Darius Garland is. Darius Garland is this ascending younger than Mitchell point guard. That is a different dynamic, and I wonder in retrospect how they, like, there was obviously excitement to play together. I wonder like what they both kind of learned from that new experience for both of them. It's maybe something that we should have asked. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. All you got to do to play is pick 2 to 5 players, and if they go score more or less than their PrizePicks projections, you can win. You win up to 10 times your money on any entry. You don't compete against other people. It is just you versus those projections available. PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch. This includes the NBA, the NFL, the MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, WNBA, NASCAR, tennis, MMA, boxing, disc golf, and more. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It is that easy. They offer safe and fast withdrawals, currently operational over 30 states and Canada. You can download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with our promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. All right, let's wrap this up. Let's talk about where Darius Garland goes from here. Evan, I'm going to give you 2 things, and you can pick which one we'll talk about first.
Sure.
First thing, I think scoring. I think there's more to come with him in terms of aggression. I think one of the most positive upsides of the playoffs is that he got to experience that one big game that he have how he can be aggressive and get buckets and score and have some of that stuff. I think that is an interesting development to see where he goes, especially in regards to Mitchell. Does that push Mitchell at times into being a more willing playmaker like he was in that game? Are there games where we see Garland rack up more, like what, and how does he do it? Is he getting more floaters? Is he getting to the line? Is he taking more threes? Like, what is the shot diet as he evolves as a scorer? I think that is the next offensive thing for him to probably figure out. Secondly, his assist usage ratio dropped a little bit. Does that go back up with better shooters? I don't last year look at it, Evan, and think this was a worse creator than he was in his last year versus his All-Star breakout year. I think he's still getting better in that way. So that when I looked at the numbers and I was like, oh, his assist usage ratio dropped a little bit, that to me just feels like somewhat of a roster thing. That's my kind of gut instinct. So do you want to talk about scoring? Do you want to talk about his passing? Where do you want to go?
Let's talk about the passing first, because it is an interesting argument how Cleveland's roster is constructed having an impact on Garland's assisted usage. As I think it's fair to maybe just attribute adding Donovan Mitchell to the fold as well in this thought experiment too, just because that's a pretty big and sizable like backcourt upgrade in terms of just like your partner. Like, no disrespect to Colin Sexton, Karis LeVert, shoot Dante Exum or Ricky Rubio or anybody else who shared the floor with Garland at the 2-guard spot, but Mitchell's certainly a different beast, and I understand. I maybe expected a bit of a dip just comparatively to his All-Star season, but I do wonder how much of it was the lack of personnel. And if you kind of like paint a picture, it does make sense because the Cavs are super top-heavy and very thin outside of maybe just their core 4 guys.
As far as I think he's just going to keep throwing crazy assists and being the guy that has the ball on the string. He's the best passer on the team. He is the alpha of them is creating. I think the scoring part to me is like, where does his ceiling go? Like, this is someone who I really think has another gear offensively scoring wise to get to. I think there are 2 things that I wonder about. Number one, does he want to play that way? I don't totally know that he does. I think his instinct is to be this guy who makes things better for others, who is more creative for everybody else, who is kind of, looking for different parts of his game. His accuracy, in the short mid has been really good year after year. He had a really good 3-point shooting year, 41% on threes this year. That's across the board, corner and non-corner. That's a really good number. At the rim, he's at 57%. That's below average for his position, but the size wise, that makes some sense to me. So like I'm curious to see like what I think pull up threes would be the thing that I would go to, and then I would also I would look at foul drawing. He's 86% free throw shooter last year, 89% the year before. Pretty low and one percentage this year, just 20% of his there was and ones that was at 26 the year before that All-Star season. Interesting this year, Evan, he was fouled on a career high 10.2% of his shot attempts. That's a leap from 6.3 the year before. I think that is the thing. I think if we're going to math this, if we're going to look at how Darius can improve as a scorer, it's not going to necessarily be like always finishing on the rim or all that stuff. I think it is getting fouls and getting better at that, and probably adding a little bit of bulk to kind of sustain some of those hits. And I do, for his sake of his eyes, he doesn't get hit in the face as much next year. Like, just hopefully he has a good healthcare plan. But also, it's the three-pointers. Can you dial them up a little bit? Frequency-wise on threes, below average every of his career except for his rookie year. Can he dial the threes up, and can he get to the free throw line more? Though that is the Garland scoring leap that to me feels like somewhat low-hanging fruit.
I agree with you. I mean, that's the argument I was making. Just like when you look at guys like Jalen Brunson, like he's just built a little thicker. Like, and I think that's just because Brunson is, because of that, like he's a little thicker as a player. I'm not saying Garland needs to get as beefy, or like he can naturally get that like beefy, or like get that Kyle Lowry like thickness to him or anything like that. But
just a big, you're saying he should just get a big bum? You're saying like RDLs and hip lifts all summer?
No, Darius Garland, if you want to get a BBL, by all means, do what you got to do, man. If that helps you hoop, by
just
all means.
Chug some creatine, you know?
Yeah, that too. If you know, you know. Don't chug creatine, kids. Don't have a heart attack. But
I take creatine. It's great.
I do too, but in limited doses. But
5 milligrams. So Garland's listed at 192 pounds.
He could get bigger. And to your point about him being more of the alpha, that is an interesting question in of itself, because if you look at how this team is built, Garland, I don't know him personally, but based on my interactions around him and just like through the lens of media availability, he seems very comfortable with not being the alpha. He's very comfortable with like being the guy who gets everybody involved. It could be like the Robin to somebody's Batman. And then you look at through a different lens, maybe this is more so like, okay, how can we maximize Donovan Mitchell offensively, all while Darius Garland still keeps doing Darius Garland things in terms of playmaking, scoring, everything else, but he is like your second option in the grand scheme of things like that. It's an interesting thought exercise, just because I don't know if Garland wants to be the alpha, despite maybe us saying that he should take that step. I know Donovan Mitchell said several times like he hopes that Darius can take that step and just hitting the next level like that, but he may not be wired like that, because he is sometimes too unselfish to a fault, where he'd rather make the extra pass. And that's a frustration I have with Evan Mobley sometimes too, but like would rather make the right play instead of maybe the selfish one. And like, yeah, that's fine in a fundamental basketball sense, but these are your stars. You want them to sometimes be a little selfish and impose their will on their opposition or matchup, especially if it's just like an easily exploitable thing. And I don't know. It's just interesting to think about when you mention it like that. Like, can he be the alpha for the Cavs?
Well, and I think it's not just like being like for sure the number one. And I do kind of wonder like what is the driving of Darius Garland. Like I would like to like get a, you know,
I'd love to be like a fly in the wall of an actual, because Darius Garland will tell you what he's saying, but he's always so laid back and even keeled about stuff that I can't like. He'll say like, yeah, I'm fired up, like I want to make the playoffs, but he just says it so calmly and like deadpan. You're like, okay.
Yeah.
But he's also a kid too, so it's hard to like fully gauge it.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I want to call he's 20, he's 23. I don't know if I want to call him a kid, but he's young. Like he's not, he's fair. Like he's not, I don't know if he's a kid anymore, but he's 23, so he's young. This is the guy on the team, him and Mobley are the two that I really want to see like how they respond to the playoff stuff. Let's find out. Like, let's just see what they show up in training camp like. Let's see kind of how they approach next year. Let's see like where they go. Like, and because I suspect those things bother them. The vibe I get from them is as much as they can be easygoing. And Garland like has like I think like a pretty like affable personality. Mm-hmm. Like I've talked to him one-on-one a couple times, and the times that I have, he is like one-on-one. It is like a completely different experience Like, he is more engaged. He's more kind of talkative. He's kind of funny. Like, it is, and you see like how like on social media, like the way it's such a different thing than how you get him in these post game things when he's just kind of like, can I like drink my smoothie and get out of here? I'm curious to see like what his edge coming into next year is and what that looks like. I like, you know, I don't know if you can't really get like all-star future bets at FanDuel or like our betting partner, but like I'd hit a Garland like future, like all-star future for next year.
Yeah, that
really like it's competitive.
It's competitive.
Guard spots are competitive.
The guard spot is competitive. I don't know how much money I'd throw at it just because you're like,
I'm
okay,
not saying, yeah, that's not what I mean. I like throw a limitless amount of money at it. What I'm saying is that it's like I would want to like, I just believe in him as a player that much.
That's a fair assessment. I think you're absolutely right to be high on him, and I think it's just going to be fascinating to see how he grows and responds, as you said, to just this first postseason appearance and what he internalizes and like how is he breaking this down and approaching it just this entire offseason, because it ended a lot sooner, I'm sure, than anybody in the Cavs thought this would, and Darius Garland included. Like, he told me he wanted to get out of the first round and see how far he could take this, and he's a dude who internalizes a lot of this frustration and uses it as a fire, and I'm curious to see like what is his next level up, because I don't want to say he plateaued. He had to learn and adapt to a new situation, but expectations have changed quite a bit, and I want to see how Garland and, of course, Mobley as well respond to that expectation and the pressure that comes with it.
All right, we're going to end there. I'm Chris Manning. That is Evan Dammarrell. Thanks again to Jake Stevens for producing Everydayers. We're going to be back tomorrow diving into all defensive teams. It's going to be fun. Hope you join us for that, and we'll talk about Evan Mobley there and how he stacks up against some of the other league's best defenders. Until then, this has been Locked On Cavs. Enjoy the hoops. Looks like the Heat, by the way, might be up 3-1 against the Knicks. Funny stuff.